thank you to invite me to join this very crucial event. So actually, I would like to start from the understanding of the basic concept of equity, or I would say climate equity, in the context of international regime, in the context of addressing climate change. So let's start from the understanding on right. So that means for everybody, we have the right to be to survive first, and then to be respected, to be safe, and also to be fully developed. So this is a right for an individual, no matter what race you belong to, what country you come from. And then I would like to look at the opportunities. So that means if you want to be better off, do you have the opportunity? I mean, as an individual, as a group, as a family, as a nation, an economy, etc., etc. So if some stakeholders that, I mean, no matter at which level, if they have no opportunity, no choice to become better off, this is not equitable. And thirdly, the current status. So this is another angle to assess if we have equity or not. So, but certainly you can develop a very long list of indicators to assess if we have equity or not. For example, we have indicators like income indicators. So in any economies, you have very high income group and very low income group. This is something described by Gini coefficient. And we also have the indicator on emission. I mean, per capita, total, and accumulate emissions. But in my mind, given the scientific facts, I believe cumulative emission should be the core to assess the emission equity. And then you may also wish to look at HDI, I mean Human Development Index, etc., to describe the basic welfare of people. And so when those understanding, but certainly I just keep the list open. The different people, they have different understanding on different priorities on understanding the equity. But those, I mean, what I just mentioned is something very fundamental, very core part of the elements. And then finally, I would like to say equity. We can also regard equity as a sort of motivation to sustain the efforts to take some action. For example, to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. And these immediately relate to the relationship between equity and ambition. So suppose if we design and develop a regime or climate architecture without with very high compromise of equity, so how the stakeholders and the architecture they will behave? So I do not believe those they feel not no equity or lack of equity, they will have strong motivation to contribute to the efforts to address climate change. So that means one, we try to design and develop an international national regime for addressing climate change. We need to pay attention to the incentive mechanisms or institutional arrangement to make people feel, or to make stakeholders feel it's equitable, and then within these architectures we can do our best to address climate change. Those are some very general conceptual framework on equity. And then let me come back to the core issues for climate change. Because I have the background of environmental economics, and so I would like to start with the concept of externality or global commons. So this immediately linked with the fact on accumulative emissions in the past 270 years, and since the Industrial Revolution. So this mattered. Why? Because scientists told us today's warming or today's climate change is mainly because of the concentration of the greenhouse gases. And those are those are caused by accumulating emission in the past over two centuries. And then the fact is, today's industrialized countries, they emitted in the history, and lead to climate change issue today. And for underdeveloped country people, for example, the people from Africa, so they emit very, very little, but they have to suffer from the negative impacts of climate change. So this is unfair. And then these basic facts lead to the basis of understanding the responsibility system. And but certainly recently some people from industrialized countries would say, take China as an example, say, oh no, China, you ranked top 2 in terms of accumulative emission. But if you look at the data accurate manner, you will see top 1 and the top 2, they are ranked the top 1 and top 2, but the absolute amount is, there is a very huge gap, and top 2 is only account for 1/3 of top 1. So having said that, I would say the fundamental fact had not been changed in the past 20 years, although some people would like to say, the world changed a lot, and we need to interpret CBDR in a dynamic way. But this fact doesn't change. That's the basis or rationale, for CBDR. So when we debate, or should we keep CBDR or not keep CBDR, so we should be aware of this. This is the basic facts. And then the accumulative emission lead to the largest externality. The largest scale of in terms of time and space. So that means that this kind of cumulative emission lead to global warming, and then influenced on other on the whole world, and those especially from developing countries, they have to suffer from the effect. This is a standardized externality, and then there will be had not been adequate offset for this externality, and then even within today's market system, world market system, this is not fair. So that means you need some cost, you have to pay, and but certainly in contrast, if you provide for some benefit, you should be paid. But for global warming, there is no real mechanism to achieve that. And the other thing I would like to mention is the pathway of the development. So when we debate the cumulative emissions, we should not forget why for developing countries, especially for emerging economies, they just repeat the conventional pathway. In terms of commercial model, in terms of value system, in terms of technology, etc., etc. So just to see today who is dominating the world. So I would say very simple. Industrialized country continue to dominate the world. Dominate the world politics, dominate the world market, and even the development pathway, and through globalization, through international trade and investment, and also through advertisement by their companies all over the world. And this will lead to the question, and so they just copy the pathway, and then they lead to new high emission sources, and we should be aware of that, because this will lead to a very pessimistic future for low carbon economy. And then if we do want to change the world, to address climate change, we have to change the pathway, the development pathway. We need to change the characteristics of the source, emission source, and then we have to change the conventional ideas and the market systems and the value systems. So if we do not think in that way, it will be very, very superficial. That means you cannot change the world. You just repeat the pattern industrialized countries leave to us. And then let me move to the problems. What problems we are faced with, what questions we have, and what conflict we are faced with. So just a very with a very simple examples. So I actually those days I told that in some other side events, say just suppose we have a bus there, only say 10 seats, and the industrialized countries they got it on board earlier, and then they occupy all the 10 seats, and then we come, developing country people come, but they told us, oh, I'm sorry, there had been no seats here, you had to walk, or maybe you can also ride a bicycle in a heavy rain or in a very cold or very warm weather, but we can take the bus with a very nice air conditioner, and then so this is a difference. This is different, but I think for the people, developing country people, they said, oh, we have the right to take the bus, and we have the dream to take the bus, to be back home, and then this is the conflict, and then the solution. There might be two fundamental solutions. One is just leave the people on the road, by bicycle or on foot. So this is one way. So another way is, so let's think about the solution in that way. Say, oh, let's create some other vehicles and create more opportunities for them to be on board, and make the people on the road feel more convenient and comfortable. when they take a trip or they take a journey. So this is another solution. And but my observation is our partners from industrialized countries, one, they emphasize the responsibilities for emerging economies, for LDCs, for developing countries as a whole. They seldom consider very seriously what about your benefit, what about your convenience, what about your welfare. So I think this is the problem. If we go in that way, I do not believe we will have sustainable motivation or incentives for the regime. So when we design the regime, we have to highlight respect to the right for developing country people, to be better off. And then this reminds me a very normal comparison of the emission data recently. As a Chinese, I always heard the comparison like this. So now you're China, you rank top 1 for emission, and your per capita emission is very close to or even higher than some member states of the European Union. And then you have to take the responsibility. So if we examine the data, yeah, that's the fact. That's true. But if you look at the reason and the course beneath the surface, you find it's unfair comparison. First, when you talk about total emission, top 1 emitter, you should not forget that the population is also top 1 rather than top 2 or lower ranks. And when you talk about the per capita emissions, these remind me the trajectories in the history of industrialized countries. So take Germany, UK as an example. Their peak was up to over, say, 15 tons per capita in the history. But today their emission, per capita emission, is much lower. And this is also the case for the France. And their per capita emission reached to around 10 tons per capita. And today they are very, very low. With nuclear as a dominant energy. But if you compare China's per capita emission, so our finding is now China is just in the left hand of the coolness curve. And then the major source of the emission come from manufacture and come from investment. And then if you look at the per capita emission from industrialized countries, the major source come from transport, building, and also consumption. So that means you have totally different sources. And no need to say in the background of globalization, China's export. The embodied emission based on the export account for around 20 to 30% of Chinese total emission. But certainly I do not mean we should defend for the emission themselves. But I would like to say this kind of analysis should be helpful for us to identify the nature of the source for economies in different stages of development, and then we will have a clear idea on the trends of the trajectory. I would say I'm very confident. For China, the peak should be lower than the historic peak for most of the industrialized countries